Hello, hello. Okay, we are back for the next episode of Why All AppSec Products Suck. This one's going to be focused on Dast. So today is Why All Dast Products Suck. So that's going to be the conversation today. As a refresher for those that may not know me, I have spent the last 30 years in tech, the last 25, 26 years in cybersecurity, most of that focused on application security in particular. And this topic about DAST products, Dynamic Application Security Testing Tools, and I'll kind of get into the details of that in a minute, has been my focus. The company I was the founder of, NT Objectives, that's what we did. We built a DAST product. Back then it was called a web scanner. Then it eventually got named over to a DAST scanner. But this has been my focus for about 20 years, is working on DAST. So, there's probably very few that have the complete understanding that I do about the strengths and weaknesses of DAST. So I'm going to be coming to this one with an extra particular amount of maybe saltiness. I don't know, but we'll see. The solution is important to me. I think it's a powerful solution. But my goal of this whole conversation is to help you get to understanding how to pick the right tool, right? There's no one tool, no one application security testing tool or defensive tool that is going to solve all your problems. In general, I would say in life, especially in tech, there's not one tool that's going to solve everything. Everything's going to have strengths and weaknesses. And so, the analogy I've been talking about is, if I had to build a house and I could pick one tool, what would I pick? And would that even be successful? Would that even be something that would work out? Probably not. I think you need a variety of tools depending on what you're doing. And so what I want to do is look at what the tools do well and what they don't do well. And most of us going to be talking about what they don't do well and what the challenges are. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So there's a bunch of different tools out there. So today we're going to be talking about the Dynamic Application Security Testing tool. There was already 2 videos before this. There was the overall kind of like introduction to this conversation. And then I did the SAST one, the Static Application Testing, which is around looking at the actual source code. So it's actually closest to the actual code. It's actually looking at the source code and trying to figure out what's going on in there. You can see the previous video for the details of the challenges on that. DAST is where we're actually going to be taking the actual scanner, the actual web application that's running, and testing it. So, and then there's IAST, SCA, all of those. We're going to continue through the series, going through the details of each of those. But today, we're talking about DAST, Dynamic Application Security Testing. This one is running against the running application trying to find vulnerabilities. This is, it's got to crawl the application, right? So like the other one, I kind of had the analogy of there's like a robot reading the code and trying to find issues. This one is actually like the robot is using the application just like a user does. It's clicking through the site effectively, going through all of the pages, trying to figure out where the inputs are. It's going through the site just like a user, trying to understand things. And as it finds different inputs, different parameters, values that are controlling the site in any fashion, those will become attack vectors that we're going to then go and attack. What I think is awesome about DAST is, and it's also like daunting, and when I bring in new developers to the project, when I brought in research people, I always tell them, like, listen, you have to understand that this DAST tool is effectively trying to find its own 0 days. So in the security world, we have this term 0 day. That means like the day it came out, the day it was published, the first day it was known more publicly. Sometimes there's, pre-0 day. That's kind of where the people are just figuring it out, but it hasn't really been released. But in effect, most of the security tools out there, if you think about an antivirus or whatever, they're looking at attacks that people already figured out this software is vulnerable to this attack. And And they're going to be looking to see, like, okay, you've got this version of software, and so then you're vulnerable because somebody already reported an issue about this. When I'm looking at DAS scanning, the scanner is looking at a site essentially completely custom, right? This is somebody's own custom application, their custom site. They may use a framework or whatever, a content manager or whatever, something like a WordPress. They could be using whatever. There's tons of different content management tools out there. There's lots of languages. We don't care on the DAS side. We do not care. We're looking at the web application that is being presented and we're going to attack it. So we have to find our own 0 days. That's pretty awesome and fun and challenging because you're having to take a piece of software and have it figure out how to replicate the behavior of attacking. This also leads to some significant challenges. Okay, so that's awesome about DAST, and maybe I'll get to it again at the end, talk a little bit about the awesomeness. The challenge is we have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. We're looking at the web pages. That's all we can deal with. We have no knowledge of the back-end code. So we're completely the opposite of what the SAST has got. They have access to what's going on behind the scenes. We have no idea. It's also a challenge because websites keep changing and evolving, and the technologies that people build with have evolved and changed, and I've seen all of this, right? From the 90s, when we were first doing web pages, they were really static. And then we started building like CGI scripts, which we're taking inputs, and we can analyze those, and I've been involved in that all the way through. Then you started introducing more JavaScript, eventually Ajax. JavaScript was doing stuff on the client side. It didn't matter until all of a sudden like Ajax was really introduced, where now the JavaScript is turning around and making external calls to the site. There's all these technical issues, or really great features, let's say. They're really great features for the user experience and making things feel more natural and the interaction more rich. But these technologies layer on a bunch of problems when you're going to try testing. So as these, and then also the data format started changing. We were going from just these get and post parameters to the like there was XML for a while. There's AMF from Flash apps, if you remember Flash apps. And now most of it's a lot of JSON that we see, tons and tons of JSON. There's others. Google Web Toolkit has its own format. There's all these different formats that also causes complexity because now the scanner has to look at all of the traffic and understand it and then be able to embed attacks into there and go replicate attack behaviors. So, and then you get all the way to single page apps, where single page apps these days, you're on a page and you're kind of just on that one page and you click on things and elements of it just kind of go away and then get replaced, but you're not actually changing pages in the same way. Not all sites, but a lot of more modern sites have moved to that model. That creates all kinds of challenges because now it's kind of like the I don't know if you remember the maze in the Labyrinth movie, but as she's trying to navigate through the maze, it's moving and shifting, and she's getting lost, more and more lost as she's making what she thinks is progress, and that's what it feels like when you're trying to scan a single page app. It's kind of evolving around you, and that causes all kinds of difficulties. So that's a big challenge. The other thing is that we have no ability on the DAS side. The DAS scanners have no ability to detect business logic flaws. That's where, maybe, let's say it says like my account, my profile. And there's a profile on the URL and it's got like ID equals, whatever, some number, right? Well, as an attacker, I'm going to change that number and see if I see somebody else's data, right? Do they have the rules in place? They probably shouldn't even be accepting a parameter in that example, but let's just say it's there. If I change it to another number, do I see somebody else's personal information? That would be a vulnerability. That would be considered a business logic flaw. There's all kinds of these. It's just a very, off the top of my head, that's an example. So in that model, the scanner could change the value, maybe see different content, but it doesn't understand that that's not content it ought to see, right? What's to say? that that's what this value was. It doesn't have the ability to understand context. That's a problem. So we can't really find anything in those sort of scenarios. We're going to have false positives because we're struggling on the idea, like, we want to get an attack, we want to tell you there's issues, but we don't want to break the site to confirm things. And then some attacks, you can't really, even breaking the site's not really the thing that would happen. So sometimes we have to report things that we think are a clue to an issue, but not necessarily an issue. So we have issues there. Sometimes we'll give unclear guidance to developers because now all we have is just a URL and a parameter, and we say, hey, this seems to be vulnerable to like cross-site scripting or whatever, or SQL injection. And now the developer has to figure out, like, okay, that endpoint would end up at this code, and so the developer has to do a lot more work. And then we have to do things to kind of give them the ability to like replay the attack so they can see it for themselves. So there's a lot of extra steps that go into it for a developer as opposed to like a SAST product, which is going to show them the code right off the bat. But again, we can find things that SAST won't find either, so some trade-offs there. We also have an issue where crawling failures, or what I'll refer to broadly as discovery, will cause issues. Because if I can't get to a site during the crawling process, right, if all I can see is these links are right here, but I didn't actually get like deeper into the site, well, I can't attack what I can't see. If the discovery piece doesn't get to pieces of the application, those parts of the application go untested, right? In the SaaS model, it has access to the code and it'll test all the code. Again, there was issues with that because it doesn't always have all the code, but we have even more, we have a slightly different problem in how we have to approach it on the DAS side. So weaknesses there. If they're doing APIs and they're not documenting the API with like a Swagger or an Open API document, well, I can't really attack a REST endpoint that has no documentation. So that becomes an issue as well. So there's some challenges there. You can't attack what you can't see. So like this image here where, we're illuminating just a little bit of a big room, this big dark space, that can happen sometimes, and it's a challenge. So now let's flip it. Let's talk about why they rock. Well, we can work on just about any application. If it's accessible by a web browser, we can generally test it to some degree, which is amazing. And that's, a SaaS product or other products can't really make that claim because they have to have support for the things going on behind the scenes. The browser interface, the HTML and JavaScript processing of a browser is fairly universal, and on the DAS side we can harness a browser, so we can actually see a lot of just about any site. You can just point it to a URL, we can scan it. We're not limited by the programming language or frameworks. We don't require source code and all the hurdles to get access to the source code. None of that's an issue with Dast. We can be run by people that are not on the AppSec team necessarily. So it could be IT security. They can easily run a scan as long as they have a list of URLs. They can go test those URLs and potentially find issues. Want to make sure they're careful because we don't want to pollute the site with a bunch of junk data, which can happen sometimes. But nonetheless, it can be run. We generally, in my experience, have had the DAS products have a lower false positive rate than SAST products. We still are going to have them. Any tool that tells you they're false positive free is absolute bananas or not telling the truth. Now what you want to do is have a good balance of false positives so that you don't want to tweak your model so tight that you're not allowing false positives, and that means you're going to create more false negatives, right, where you're missing vulns. But you don't want it too loosey-goosey either, where you're reporting about a bunch of false positives. Nobody wants the boy who cries wolf. That's an issue. And we can also work with apps that are more distributed, like a bunch of microservices that comprise the app. Whereas, again, those are harder for a SaaS product because they have to test each of the different ones, which may be in different languages, all these little microservices. We can scan them, how they're running. And again, as long as they're up and running, we can hit them and we can scan them. And we can then be also improved when combined with other solutions. And I should say the same about them. the IAST SCA products, they also need to benefit from the DAST, and so these tools all should work together. Ultimately, they get improved when they're working together and help each other, and DAST really is the same there. So, you know, I have an affinity for the DAST side because I think it's fascinating, but I also very much understand the challenges and limitations of DAST and what DAST has to do to keep pressing to get better. So that's, I guess that's really what I wanted to share here today. If you want to continue following on this series, the next episode is on the IAST products. So come join us for that. And if you want to get more from, follow any on all the other social medias. Here's all the, I got some links off the website, danondev.com, and look forward to continuing the conversation and starting to look forward to the feedback as I'm starting to kind of reach out and promote the series. So the feedback is fun. I've had some of this conversation, done this talk at security conferences, and the conversation is awesome. So I'm probably going to do, this is right now a 8-part series. I'm probably going to do a 9th that'll include some of the feedback and conversations that I've had as a result. So thank you for joining.